A lover scorned is a phrase whispered often in taverns, murmured in courtrooms, and written in the yellowed pages of history. But this story was not some distant legend. It was a grim reality that unfolded in a quiet town where everyone knew each other's business, or at least thought they did. It began with Clara and Jonathan, whose romance had once been the envy of their neighbors. They were inseparable, two young souls whose laughter filled the cobblestone streets, whose whispers carried promises under candlelight. Clara was a woman of fierce devotion, someone who gave herself wholly to those she loved. Jonathan, on the other hand, was charming, reckless, and dangerously fond of admiration. It was not long before admiration turned into temptation, and temptation became betrayal. For months, Jonathan's infidelity was a secret Clara refused to see. She clung to the fragments of their love, convincing herself that his late nights were just work, that the perfume on his collar was nothing more than coincidence. But truth has a way of surfacing, like oil in water, and one night Clara saw him with her own eyes, Jonathan's lips pressed against another woman's beneath the gaslight glow of a street corner. Her heart, which had burned with love, now burned with something else entirely. From that night forward, Clara was not the same. Those who saw her remarked that her eyes seemed hollow, her voice carried a weight, and her once steady hands trembled with a restless energy. Jonathan, blinded by arrogance, dismissed her silence as weakness, never imagining the storm brewing behind her gaze. He continued his affairs openly, flaunting them in the way only a man convinced of his invulnerability could. But Clara was planning. In the still hours of night, she crafted her revenge as carefully as Jonathan had once courted her. She studied his routines, noted the places he lingered, and envisioned the moment when love would no longer protect him. To those who asked, she smiled politely, pretending to be mending her heart, when in truth she was sharpening it into a weapon. It was a winter evening when the plan unfolded. Jonathan had arranged to meet one of his lovers in a secluded cottage just outside town. The air was cold, the kind of biting chill that made footsteps crunch louder on frozen ground. He arrived with his usual swagger, unaware that Clara had followed, her figure cloaked in shadow, her resolve hardened by months of betrayal. Inside, Jonathan lit the fire, poured himself a drink, and waited, humming a tune he had once sung to Clara. The irony cut her deeper than any blade could. She stepped forward, her face illuminated by the flicker of firelight. Jonathan's expression shifted, first confusion, then irritation, and finally, as he saw what she held in her trembling hands, fear. The weapon was not elaborate, not some relic of cruelty, but an ordinary kitchen knife. Yet in Clara's grip it became something extraordinary, the embodiment of every sleepless night, every tear, every memory of his touch turned sour. Words tumbled from her lips, accusations, pleas, curses, until her voice cracked into silence. Jonathan tried to charm her, tried to explain, but the time for words had passed. What happened next was fast, almost too fast for memory to catch in detail. There was a struggle, a cry, the crack of a glass shattering against the floor. Then, the sound of a blade meeting flesh, once, twice, as Clara unleashed all that had been festering inside her. When it was over, Jonathan lay lifeless on the rug, his charm extinguished, his arrogance silenced forever. Clara stood above him, her breath ragged, her hands stained red. For a moment, she felt nothing at all, no triumph, no sorrow. Only the strange emptiness of a storm finally passed. She set the knife down carefully, almost tenderly, as though it were a part of her she no longer needed. Then she walked out into the snow, leaving footprints that told the story she would never speak aloud. The town was scandalized when the truth emerged. Some pitied Clara, whispering that she had been driven mad by love's cruelty. Others condemned her, insisting that no betrayal justified bloodshed. The courts saw only the crime, not the heart that had led to it. Clara stood trial with the same stillness she had carried after that night, her fate sealed by the testimony of evidence and silence. Her sentence was harsh, as expected, but what haunted the town long after was not Jonathan's death, nor Clara's punishment. It was the realization that love, the force they had all envied in the couple, had transformed into something monstrous. It was a reminder that devotion, when twisted by betrayal, could become a weapon sharper than any blade. And so, the story of Clara and Jonathan was told and retold, each time with new details, new embellishments, but always the same core truth: a lover scorned is a dangerous thing. Their tragedy lived on, not just as gossip, but as a cautionary tale of how passion and revenge can walk hand in hand, leading even the most devoted heart into darkness. The story did not end with Clara's conviction, though the newspapers of the day would have had the world believe otherwise. For many, her fate was sealed when the judge's gavel struck, condemning her to years behind stone walls and iron bars. But life has a way of carrying on, even for those trapped in cages, and Clara's story continued, quietly, in whispers and shadows. In prison, she became a figure of fascination. Some inmates shunned her, afraid of the woman who had killed for love. Others sought her out, eager to sit near her at meals or trade small comforts in exchange for the sound of her voice recounting her past. Clara rarely spoke of Jonathan by name. When she did, it was never with tenderness nor rage, but with a chilling detachment, as though he were a dream long faded. What lingered instead was the look she carried in her eyes, vacant, but with a spark of something unbroken beneath. The guards, too, were drawn to her. One in particular, a man named Harris, found himself watching her more than was appropriate. At first, it was curiosity, the way one might watch a wild animal pacing behind bars. But over time, curiosity became something softer, though Harris would never dare admit it aloud. Clara, for her part, seemed to notice. She always noticed. Beyond the prison walls, Jonathan's name faded faster than Clara's. The woman he had betrayed her with disappeared from town, unable to endure the stares, the gossip, and the unspoken accusation that she had been the spark of the tragedy. Jonathan's family tried to salvage his reputation, painting him as the victim of an unstable woman's obsession. But those who remembered his wandering eye and careless arrogance were not so easily convinced. The truth, as always, lived somewhere in between, a blurred line no one cared to trace too closely. Years passed. Clara aged, her once youthful beauty hardened into sharp lines, her hands calloused by endless labor. Yet there remained in her an undeniable presence, a gravity that drew others near. It was said that new inmates often sought her counsel, that her words could soothe even the most restless souls. She killed a man, the guards would remind them, but the women whispered back, yes, but she loved him first. Outside, the town could not let her story go. Writers published lurid pamphlets retelling the crime in embellished detail. Theater troupes dramatized it on stage, casting Clara as either a devil or a tragic heroine. Children dared one another to walk past the cottage where Jonathan had died, swearing they could still hear Clara's cries on the wind. Her life became legend long before it ended, twisted into something larger than truth, as all scandals eventually do. And yet, for Clara, the nights were the hardest. Alone in her cell, she would sometimes wake from dreams of Jonathan's laughter, sharp and mocking, echoing down corridors where no one else could hear. Other nights, she dreamt of their happier days, the long walks by the river, the stolen kisses, the promises whispered in the dark. Those mornings, she would sit in silence, torn between grief and fury that her heart could still betray her with such memories. What few knew, and what Clara never confessed, was that her act of revenge had not given her peace. It had given her silence, yes, but silence can be louder than any scream. In the stillness, she carried the weight of not just Jonathan's betrayal, but her own choice. She had wanted him to suffer, to feel what she had felt. And yet, in the instant the knife fell, it had been she who was transformed forever, condemned not only by the law but by her own reflection. When the end finally came, it was quiet, unremarkable. Clara died in her cell, an old woman who had once been young and full of fire. The guards found her at dawn, her face calm, her hands folded neatly as though she had been waiting for that moment. The town mourned not so much her death as the closing of a chapter. For decades, she had been their ghost story, their warning, their secret thrill. Now she was gone. But legends do not die so easily. To this day, the tale of Clara and Jonathan is told in hushed voices, each teller shaping it to their own liking. Some say Clara was a monster, others a victim, still others a woman who simply refused to be broken by a man's betrayal. The truth, buried beneath time and retelling, is lost. Yet the lesson remains, carved into the memory of anyone who hears it. Love is the most dangerous weapon of all, and a lover scorned is a flame that can burn down entire worlds.